Yes. Sorry, I'm not. This is not my natural forte to be sitting in an armchair. I think clearly one of the speakers earlier on talked about there are only certain kinds of crops that can be sustainable. I think that was an issue that came through. When we talk about diversification, I would talk about those farmers who either because of necessity or because of aspirations for economic growth would diversify either on-farm or off-farm. And on-farm is either through different types of crop production or moving up and down the value chain within their own produce, or moving into different types of production. So that I would call, in terms of, it's important to recognize that there is both diversification and specialization. Only some farmers can specialize because those are the ones who can achieve economies of scale. Smaller farmers, as I said yesterday, are perhaps more able to diversify because they are leaner and able to do it. They don't have that same turnaround period that larger farmers have. So that would be my response to you. It's not the best of responses, but this is the way I would envisage it.
Ms. Aldo Tafoyo from the Promoting Enterprise. Doctor, I noticed that there's a lot of emphasis put on entrepreneuring. In the United Kingdom, there are associations such as Youth Business International, and it's usually accompanied by services such as training, mentorship, and financing. And what happens here in rural entrepreneuring? Are these different stances, or what?
I'm not sure there is a difference. I think the first port of call for any person who wants to diversify his or her business is family and friends. That's the first thing. We don't have credit loan societies in the way that you do here in Mexico. So people would go straight to, if they exhaust family and friends, then they will go to banks. There is no other way of doing it, or venture capitalists. But venture capitalists don't normally work with smaller producers, as you well know. So I think the situation is very, very similar, apart from the fact that we don't have as many small farms in the UK and in Europe than you do here. So we don't have as many subsistence farmers. So the opportunities for leveraging in funds are a lot easier, I think, in the UK than in Mexico. That would be my view.
Good morning, my name is Eduardo Morales, and regarding your first intervention, when you talked about the similitude between the producers in the UK and our producers, I would like to know the average age of farmers in the UK, their school degrees, if they are protected products due to tradition or tariffs, and or extent.
Right. The average age of a farmer in the UK is 57, and rather like here in Mexico, there are few people who are entering in the business, and there could well be a crisis in new entrants into the farm sector, which is why I was saying yesterday and today that entrepreneurial education for people who wish to come into farming, either sons and daughters of farms, is vitally important. There must be incentive schemes for them to do it, and we do that in the UK. We provide incentives, financial incentives. The latter part of your question, there is no retirement age. Farmers, I work with farmers who are in their late 80s. I'm sure there are people in Mexico who are still working in the late 80s. So people don't retire. And one of the problems is that we have many tenant farmers also in the UK. And tenant farmers can only pass on the tenancy of the farm once to their son. and after that they have to pass it on to somebody else. So the protection for farmers is very, very, very poor. They don't have pensions because they're sole traders, so they have to find their own pensions. So they're not in a protected industry in that sense of the word. And I'm sure that's the same here in Mexico.
I'm from El Cabo, and well, someone formulated the question that I wanted to ask, and it's about the following. But firstly, I would like to tell you that in Mexico, we have a very well-developed agriculture in very large states as Sonora, and we have consultancy with professionals, but most of the production in our land is carried out by those who have no formal education at all. However, there are universities that offer education for agronomists, for veterinarians, but we are not having any good results. Livestock business is still producing with the same techniques that the Spaniards brought about. And that's not telling us much about a good development. And the question that was not answered is about the degree, the schooling that you have.
Yes, we have what are called land-based colleges, which normally take on the sons and daughters of farmers. And now increasingly there is the beginnings of regulation where anybody who wants to work on a farm, to manage a farm, to own a farm, or to be a tenant, has to go through a program of learning which is beneath degree level. And that is starting to combine both technical skills, which most young people who've been working on farms have had from the age of 8, when they're 9, 10, but what they haven't got is the enterprise skills. So land-based colleges are starting to do that now, very much so, and it's a requirement that if you take on a farm that you have followed a program of education which is about developing both management skills and technological skills. I hope that answers your question.
Good afternoon, doctor. My name is Irineo González. I am from Nayarit. My question is a little bit extensive. Maybe it doesn't correspond to you to give me a very wide answer, but it's related to climate change. Climate change that has been so mentioned in the news, on television, and as it has been said in our presentations today, my question is, you've also talked about the climate change as a fact. Would you say that the developed countries as yours, maybe they gave us this technology development knowledge? Would you say that they also, the developed countries, should also set the example for reducing pollutants that are being used in several space programs? And as a reflection, we have the case of Sinaloa, northern Mexico. I don't know if politicians of these very important countries have asked themselves about tomorrow having very awful cases affecting food for population in general.
I think it would be disingenuous of me not to accept the accusation that you're making. Clearly, developed nations have to bear the full responsibility for the major effects of climate change. But to coin an awful phrase, we are where we are. And I think I can fully understand why certain countries such as India and China, for example, are suggesting that it's rather hypocritical of North America and Europe, North America being the biggest pollutant in the world. That's not a political point, by the way, absolutely not. So I fully accept that, and I think that we in developed countries need to shoulder a higher burden and provide more example in terms of the way that we are engaging with climate change issues. And I'd like to put my hand on my heart and say that we are doing that. But the reality is, I think, far from the truth. But it's not something that's going to go away. It's something that we all have to engage in.
Good afternoon, Doctor. My question is if whether in the UK all the first quality products are going to a different country. In our case, we are small producers that are beginning to produce greenhouse produce, and the orientation that is given by the consultants is to produce quality with quality so we could export them. I would like to know that if in your country the first quality products are protected in order to stay in your country.
Yes, the simple answer is that they are protected. But let's not forget that in the UK we are still net importers of produce, and we are net importers because of our desire to eat out of season produce. And I hope that that's not the case in Mexico, but that is our desire. So our supermarket shelves, we can still, in December, we can get strawberries, we can get fruit that you shouldn't be getting because we're importing it from places like Kenya. And associated with that, of course, is the fact that we are, I think, certainly in Europe and North America, have a very exploitative relationship, which links back to the point that your colleague was making, the extent to which consumers, I think, need to be much more educated, both in terms of food production from farms, but also from our seas. But this is a personal view. You may all have different views altogether. So we are net importers, and we are protecting certain goods. And I talked about earlier on this whole notion of there is a dynamic occurring in the UK where people are recognizing that we have to start to be eating and producing sustainably. And that's starting to happen, and I think most people are welcoming that. But educating the general public and supermarkets, because in the UK, for example, I don't know if you know Tesco here. They've not yet reached Mexico, but they will, folks. They'll be here. One in every £7 or $15, I suppose, that's spent on the UK high street goes into the supermarket's pockets. And you can imagine at the beginning of the food chain how much the producer gets from that, the farmer, going back to the notion of if they collaborated more, they would be able to control the power of supermarkets. And at the moment, the only producers that do that are milk producers, but nobody else seems to be doing that at all in the way they ought to be.
Well, my first question is, ¿cuántas preguntas tiene usted? Well, I would like to know whether the UK has agricultural planning. My second question is about funding. And related to funding, I would like to know if the credits that are requested are timely given, enough, and what is the interest rate, if there is not much bureaucracy in the middle, who are subject to those credits. And my third question is, what are the most profitable crops?
The first one is that we rely on the Common Agricultural Policy, which, as I said yesterday, is starting to come to an end in 2013, and we're preparing people for that now. So Europe, and the biggest budget for Europe is still agriculture. I think it accounts for 45% of the European budget. And of course, for those of you in developing nations, will find that anomalous in that you're not competing on a level playing field. So that's where the first money comes from. The second money is that there is a devolved budget from the British government to all farmers across the UK. And they now have to compete for 3 different kinds of funding, depending on the nature of what they suggest they are going to do over an annual period or an average planning period. But again, that's been changed as the whole notion of allowing the removal of cap necessitates, as I said yesterday, farmers having to become, whether they like it or not, more enterprising. So that's the reality. The third question was about interest rates, I think. The interest rates that I think you mean for farmers who are taking loans are the same as anybody else. We have a business rate and we have a private rate, and all of which are influenced by bankers who seem to do very, very well out of the current financial economic crisis. You talked about the last question you asked was most productive crops. Well, I think that's a very difficult question to answer because all crops have got different market prices. I talked about rapeseed yesterday, which is people are buying into because they're getting huge prices because of biofuel necessity. But we see cyclical growth. We're now starting to develop more biofuel production, which is paying very, very well indeed. So rape prices are going up. Wheat is obviously doing particularly well this year. And those are, I think, probably the most productive and successful crops at the moment.
Why do you think that in the southeast of Asia is so successful, economically speaking? Because years ago, they were worse producers than us. They were more in the livestock industry, but now they have a high